A nice friend. Good evening,
Um,
everyone.
well,
Oh,
give me about 5 more seconds.
oh,
I'm
okay.
setting up the streaming. Okay, and go ahead.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Witness to History this beautiful Sunday evening, September 15th, 2024. Since the first Witness to History in July 2020, we focus mostly on having wonderful conversations and getting to know our moorland neighbors better. But it is always a welcome opportunity to hear from a moorland neighbor about an important event that we can bring to our audience through the platform of Witness to History. I want to thank you, Joanne Perkins, for suggesting that the Porch Talk for a Beloved Community be one of these programs, which took place at Eastview United Church of Christ on August 24th, 2024, with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Connie Schultz as the guest speaker. This important commemoration of Dr. Martin Luther King's beloved community speech at Heights Christian Church in July 1965 will never lose its significance in Shaker Heights and to the broader community. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you so
You're
much for
welcome.
suggesting this. The annual Porch Talks is a collaboration of Heights Christian Church, Plymouth Church, and Eastview United Church of Christ. It's our pleasure to bring Connie Schultz's Porch Talk to a beloved community speech to our Witness to History audience this evening. And thank you all for being here with us this evening. And of course, as I always do, I thank a few people around the screen. Of course, John Dutton does his magic with, our Zoom. And my partner on Witness to History, John, thank you. Megan Hayes, who's our Shaker Heights history librarian, for cataloging all of our Witness to History programs for people to see forever, forever. To Kevin Kay, who's not with us this evening, for his unwavering support and suggesting and his creativity for suggesting Witness to History, and to Theo Darden for spreading the word about Witness to History. He always keeps us posted every month and tells us how to call in and, just to tune in. But, this evening we are really in for, a special occasion because this is a very important speech that we're going to hear, as well as just a commemoration of Dr. King being in Shaker Heights in 1985. But I'd like to say, without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Carl Cormany, who will tell us the history of the Porch Talks and a little bit more about Connie Schultz. And Carl is a member of Heights Christian Church and the planning committee of the Porch Talks each year. And I would then like everyone to witness together the words of Connie Schultz and a few words from Dr. King. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Carl.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Porch Talks for the Beloved Community started back in 2019 at Heights Christian Church. It's a series of social justice programs that draws inspiration and its name from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. having delivered a speech from the church's side porch and from his vision for a beloved community in which poverty, prejudice, and discrimination are eliminated. In particular, in July of 1965, Heights Christian Church leaders invited Dr. King to speak at the church, which provoked controversy within the congregation and the community. But despite the temporary removal of the pews by a faction of the members under the pretense of doing renovations, plus bomb threats and protesters, Dr. King came and spoke from the porch to a diverse crowd that would have been too large to fit inside the sanctuary. The Porch Talk series provides a continued call to work toward the beloved community and its all-inclusive spirit of kinship, justice, and peace. Weather permitting, which it has every time but one, the program is presented from the same porch from which Dr. King spoke. Connie Schultz was originally scheduled to speak in the year 2020, but the pandemic forced the cancellation of Porch Talks that year. Then in 2021, Heights Christian sold its building, the building with the porch, to Eastview UCC and moved to the chapel at Plymouth Church UCC, also in Shaker Heights. In 2022, members of all three of those congregations joined together to restart the Porch Talk series. And this year, the stars realigned, and we were fortunate to hear Connie Schultz speak on the dignity of work and how Dr. King was an advocate for all workers.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a wonderful background. And I think we have a short clip of the 1965, very short clip of that event.
The whole section of education.
I still have faith in the future. And I believe we're going to solve this problem in America. We as Negroes, I believe, are going to win our freedom because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Thomas Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored in this land without wages. They made cotton king, and they built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. And yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continue to grow and develop. And I submit to you that if the inexpressible cruelties of slavery couldn't stop us, the opposition that we now face will surely fail. Yes.
Very important clip. And to see the outpouring of people who were there in 1965 and those who opposed his speech. So we will move on to Connie Schultz's speech at this point. And I'm going to take some notes on her speech. It was very good. I was there, everybody. I was there on August 24th, just a few weeks ago. It was wonderful.
I first met our speaker today many years ago in this building. I'm not sure exactly when it was, sometime mid to late 1990s, I think. A single mother at the time, she and her daughter were living in Shaker Heights and came to worship with Heights Christian Church. In early 2003, she met a guy who lived west of Cleveland in Lorraine. They decided they couldn't live without each other, and they married the next year. She eventually moved away from our fair city. I say eventually because the newlyweds maintained 2 households, including her rented duplex here, for more than a year, until after her daughter had graduated from Shaker Heights High School. And 2005 was a big year for our speaker, too. She won a Pulitzer Prize that year. In case you're not quite sure, Pulitzer Prizes are American journalism's most prestigious honor and are awarded in various categories. She won for commentary. The Pulitzer judges praised her Cleveland Plain Dealer columns for providing, quote, a voice for the underdog and the underprivileged, close quote. All told, she wrote for the Plain Dealer from 1993 to 2011. Took a little bit of time off in between there, 1 year. The last 9 of those, she was a columnist. She's also been a columnist for Creators Syndicate in USA Today and an essayist for Parade Magazine. Currently, she posts essays and photos on a Substack called Hopefully Yours. She says it's an ongoing conversation about the daily mess of life. In addition, she's the author of 4 books, a collection of essays entitled Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths, a memoir called And His Lovely Wife, which is about the successful 2006 campaign of her handsome husband for the United States Senate. She also wrote a New York Times best-selling novel, The Daughters of Erie-Town, and most recently, Lola and the Troll, a children's book that was published this past February. And besides all that, she's a professor of practice in journalism at Denison University, after having taught for 7 years in the journalism school at her alma mater, Kent State University. I could go on and on, but you're here to listen to her, not me. So please join me in welcoming Connie Schultz.
Oh, I didn't even know all of you were here. Wow, that's a lot. I was only seeing that. Thank you, Carl. Thank you. Well, first of all, can we just have another round of applause, please, for the choir? Holy cow. That was so great. I was sitting, I'm an alto, so I had another round of soprano envy to sit through because it was just so beautiful. Thank you. Carl's right. This was our church home starting in 1994. We lived on Winslow Road for the first 2, Divorce Street, I always called it, because so many of us end up there in those 2-family homes when we're first trying to figure out our lives. And then I lived at Southington, at the corner of Southington and Huntington for 8 years. And this church was like a second home to us at a time when I really needed more than one definition of home. So I didn't have to be asked twice to come here for this. Some of you may know I had actually agreed to do this in 2020, and we all know how that turned out. So I'm glad we're all here. I'm sure many of you have lost someone during COVID, and I'm so sorry, so did I. What a time we were through. And I'm really grateful that we're all here today. We're still UCCers, by the way. Sherry and I got married at Pilgrim, UCC, and now we live in the city of Cleveland. We came back this way, and we're in the city, and we belong to UCC Church in Rexville with Pastor John King. Many of you, I'm sure, have met him. 59 years ago, Martin Luther King stood on these steps, and he talked about Black Americans' fight for civil rights. And let me just say, it should have been always all Americans' right for Black Americans to vote. We're either an ally all the time, or we're not an ally at all. And that never has that been more true than today. Here's what he said from the steps. I actually watched the video of his speech this morning. I wanted to just remember again. I've seen it numerous times. I still have faith in the future, he said, and I believe we're going to solve this problem in America. I believe we are going to win our freedom because the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scarred we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. How remarkable, isn't it, his faith all those years ago? And how disheartening sometimes to see how relevant his words are today. But he would not want us to give up. And so here we are. Thank you so much for inviting me to spend a little bit of time with you. Coretta Scott King, I've been quoting a lot lately too, though, because she said, and I'm going to paraphrase, with every generation, the fight is renewed. Every time, think about it, those of us who've lived long enough, I'm 67, we've certainly wondered time and again, how could this be happening again? How is this fight not over, right? But the good news, I feel always, in the fight for justice is that there are more of us, and we outnumber the hate as long as we show up. And every morning, each of us answers the same question. You may not know it, you may not think about it, but really we do. Every morning the question is basically this: is this the day I give up, or is this the day I show up? And every single one of you today had the same answer. I don't think you showed up for me. I think what we're showing up for here is the memory of a civil rights leader whose words still give us such great comfort, but also give us our marching orders. I think we also show up because we need one another right now, a lot. We are in trying times, shall I say. And we all need one another, and so we had the same answer to that question today. Much of my work through my career, particularly my career as a columnist, I've been a columnist for more than 20 years now, has involved telling the stories of working class Americans. My people, all colors. I was the first in my family to go to college. I grew up in Ashtabula, Ohio. My mom, I've told this story before, in part because it so informs my work to this day. I was the oldest of 4 kids. And so in the summer months when we didn't have school, it was my job to watch after my little siblings all the time. A job every girl wants, unpaid. And at the end of summer, my mother would take just me with her, and we would go to a luncheon diner that was in the basement of a department store called Carlisle's. And one of those years, I was 11, I believe, at the time, because it's just seared in my memory that this was the time when Mom once confirmed it. Mom recognized the waitress, which of course is very common in small towns, and was having a conversation with her a little bit while she was taking our order and serving our food. And a man who was dressed, we were there at lunchtime, and a man in a suit grew very impatient with her and started yelling at her because he didn't like something she had served. And I mean, he was just yelling at her. And she got very apologetic. Of course, "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't know, sir." And she started to tear up. And my mother is watching this, and my mother was 4'11" with a beehive. And she was such a strong personality. And she kept staring at that man as he was yelling at that woman, and he did not care one bit that we were seeing this unfold. And when the waitress ran into the kitchen and we could hear her crying, my mother kept staring at him, and he didn't say anything. My mother turned to me and in a very loud voice said, "Honey, don't marry him until you see how he treats the waitress." What she meant by that, of course, is how we treat the people we're allowed to mistreat is the measure of who we are. And I come from a family of people who were allowed to be mistreated. When I think about what drove my work, I keep coming back to the advice of my mother, and I'll give you just one example that really illustrated how I never forgot her words. Because what she meant over and over again is, it's not enough to respect them, you gotta show up for them. And I'm thinking about even what I'm wearing today. I'm not a fashionista by any term, just ask my kids, they'll tell you all the reasons I'm not. But my mom always said, I mean, there was no way I wasn't gonna dress up, because she said, how you dress tells people what you think of them. So she was big on representing, right, showing up. And one night, and so this may sound familiar to some of you, I don't know if you remember this column, but I still hear from people all the time about why you tip in cash. Because I've written a lot about what happens to servers, what happens to their wages, what happens to their tips, but it all started with this column. And it came about because Sharon and I had gone to a charitable event. It was for Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries, a wonderful organization. And it was at one of the largest party centers, certainly the most popular in the city of Cleveland. And during the dinner, we had seen women who were my age and older, frankly, and almost all of them were black women, waiting on us, rushing around to serve us. And at the end of the night, one of them was at the coat check. And she looked exhausted. It was a very long line. It was hundreds of people who had attended. And it was a cold, wintry night. And Sharon and I are standing in line, and I'm watching her. And by the time I get up there, and I hand her my ticket, and I said, "You look like you'd like to go home." And she said, "I am so tired." And I pointed to a glass jug that was full of tips. It said tips on it, big sign said tips. And it was one of those barrel jugs, right? And so you could see in it, and I could see a few 10s and 20s, not just, a few 5s, a lot of singles. And I said, I just thought I'd try to be encouraging. And I said, well, at least you get these. And she said, oh, we don't keep the tips. And I said, what do you mean you don't keep the tips? And Sharon was standing right behind me, and she says, no, we don't keep the tips. Management keeps the tips. And I said, what? And I heard Sharon say, oh, no. So that was a Friday night. On that Monday, I called the company, and I got a middle manager, first one. She started yelling at me. And she says, honey, nobody cares who keeps the tips. And I said, I think they do. I think they care a lot. She goes, they don't even know if they're tips. I said, it says tips right on the jar. And when people give their money, they expect it to go to the person behind the counter. In my business, in my profession, you're onto something when you get a call 2 hours later from 2 company vice presidents on speakerphone. You really know and you didn't call them, right? They called me. And you really know you're onto something when the first words out of their mouth is, honey, there's no story here. I gave them a chance to change their policy right then and there. I said, I'd be happy to write that you have seen the light and you're not going to. No, we don't think anybody cares. Nobody cares who keeps the tips. So I wrote the column pretty much the way I just described it to you, and I said at the end, they say you don't care about the tips. What do you think? By 11 a.m. that morning, they had already changed their policy on the most popular radio show in Cleveland. What I found out later, and you know what? This has so little to do with me. I just simply let people know what's going on. And it was an early lesson for me in my column writing. Most people want to do good. Most people are decent, but they don't think there's anything they can do. They think everything's too big and too hard, and they don't know how they can make a difference. If you give them an idea of how they can, they will step up big time. And that's what I learned with that first column. I wrote, it's got to be at least 20 columns after that over a period of years about all the other tipping practices, because the other thing I learned, if you stand up for people who aren't used to having a champion, they got a lot of stories they're going to tell you. And if they think they can trust you, here's the thing I had to do all the time. If I was writing about a practice in a restaurant, I had to further call that boss because I knew what was coming next and say, if any of the people who talk to me get fired, that's my next column. And that's how we kept them in their jobs. Think about how challenging it can be for people who don't have anyone fighting for them. And again, it's not about me. I just thought I got this very valuable piece of real estate in the newspaper, and this is how I'm going to use it. Right? I'm going to fight for the people my parents couldn't fight for. My father was a utility worker, and he hated his job, and at least everything he communicated to us, for all the 36 years he was in it. He was a union worker, very proud to be a union worker. Our practice in the summer, he had to wait for 3 daughters before he got a son. So he taught all his daughters how to throw a ball, how to play ball. I loved it. And our practice in the summer was Dad would sit on the front steps while Mom was making supper, and my brother and I, my little brother Chucky and I, would be playing catch in the front yard. I remember I was a sophomore in high school when this happened, and he was 6 years younger than I, and we're playing, and my dad started shaking his head. And I looked at him, I said, what is it, Dad? And I thought I'd thrown it wrong, or something. He didn't even look at us. He just said, you could teach a monkey how to do what I do. My father thought he was a nobody, as did my mother, who was a nurse's aide, worked as a nurse's aide. She went back to work. She was a stay-at-home mom, went back to work so they could send me, their first kid, to college. They thought they were 2 nobodies, but they were going to raise 4 somebodies. And all 4 of us went to college. My dad and I had a complicated relationship, a lot of it about race. But I did have an occasional insight into his ongoing rage at times. Because one time, my mother, he did a lot of overtime. Utility workers, look who we were counting on just a few weeks ago. All those utility workers. Dad worked in the plant. He wasn't a lineman. And Mom said to me, take the dog. We had a dog like this big. I don't know what she thought she was going to protect me from. Get her in the cart and go take your dad plate. So he's got dinner. And I pulled up, and it was nighttime already. And when my father walked out from the plant, past the guard shack, our dog didn't recognize him and started barking viciously because he was covered in coal dust. They just looked, I would not have recognized him. He was wearing clothes I'd never seen because he always showered at the plant after work. His clothes were laundered at the plant. He always looked he cared a lot about how he looked. So, and when I saw him and gave him his dinner, and he's talking to me very briefly, and then I heard the guard say, "Schultz, get back in here." And I thought, oh, this is not going to go well. Because my dad was a big, burly, 240-pound man who broke more bones in fights than he did in softball. And he just said, "I got to go." And he walked right back into the plant. And it taught me so much in an early age, without having the words for it yet, about the dignity of work, the dignity of labor. Men like my father struggled with race all his life. They never saw the ally we had in Dr. King. I wrote about this once a number of years ago. And I wrote about what happened on March 18, 1968, less than a month before an assassin's bullet ended his life. King stood before a packed house of striking black sanitation workers and their supporters in Memphis and trumpeted the inherent grace in manual labor. His exact wording, "All labor has dignity," shook the rafters of the church that night when he spoke. It's also the title of Michael Honey's book of King's speeches, an entire book of speeches on labor rights and economic justice, which is how I happened to read his entire speech from that day. Sharon and I remember recently, the reason we have that book is Kamala Harris, soon after she became senator, asked Sharon what he had just done for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and he told her about the speech he gave, and she said, "I got a book for you." And she came in and gave him that book. It's just so circular, isn't it? Like, we just love thinking about that now. In 4 short words, void of race or gender, though. I mean, I guess the way I should say it is, his speeches on labor and economic justice focused on workers, period. And in 4 short words, void of race or gender, King lifted up all workers in this rebuke to those who would measure a person's worth by the status of his or her profession. I love this quote. "One day," he said, "our society would come to respect the sanitation worker if it is to survive. For the person who picks up our garbage in the final analysis is as significant as the physician. For if he doesn't do his job, diseases are rampant. All labor has dignity." How tragic that so many of the most exploited white workers in America fail to see themselves as King saw them. Think of that again when I think about how my father said you could teach a monkey to do what I do. Martin Luther King would never have spoken that way about men who kept the lights on. My mom always, when we would turn on any switch, she would say, "Thank your daddy for that." And I used to imagine him hurling a spear of lightning through the air to our house. That's how powerful I thought he was growing up. How tragic, too, that so many white men didn't see how Martin Luther King was fighting for their sons and their families when he courageously began speaking out against the Vietnam War. I grew up, as I said, in Ashtabula. My county, Ashtabula County, lost 26 men in that war, 26 young men. So many others came back changed forever. And this ended up being a scene in my novel because it was seared in my mind so much of what it meant to be in a working class town because, Ohio, I don't know if you know this, we always rank 5th in the number of people we send to war. World War II, World War I, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War. We're a country that serves, we're a state that serves. And I remember when I was little my mom would make casseroles all the time. We either had to go to a house for somebody who was sending somebody to Vietnam, we were bringing a casserole for somebody who was coming home from Vietnam, or we were bringing a casserole because somebody just died in Vietnam. Decades after Martin Luther King's death, his friend Andrew Young said this about his anti-war activism towards the end of his life, when he was making a lot of enemies because he was speaking out about the war. "The movement ceased to be political for him," Young said. "It was spiritual. I find such comfort in that because it speaks to the soul work of justice." Just today, the New York Times ran a column with this headline: "Joy is not a strategy." Once again, a person with an opinion confuses the laziness of cynicism with the rigor of intellect. I've been quoting Nick Cave to myself a lot these days, the singer-songwriter. Hope is optimism with a broken heart. I'm going to say that again because I just love that. Hope is optimism with a broken heart. It's not like we don't know how badly things can go. Look at us. We all know how badly things can go, and then we get back up and we try again. Hope is hard work. In my view, joy is the engine that drives us in this endeavor. I feel joy whenever I'm in the company of people who care about someone other than themselves. All of you, for example. I feel joy looking out at all of you. You could be anywhere today, and look where you are. In this heat, you showed up. That's who you are. How could I not feel joy in your company? Earlier this month, Sharon and I visited Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, where Martin Luther King and his father used to preach. Actually, his father was in charge. He always made that clear. And he was this pastor, is it associate or assistant pastor? He was assistant pastor. We were there to hear Sharon's Senate colleague, Reverend Ralph Warnock, give his Sunday sermon. I took notes throughout that blazing delivery. These words have stayed with me from that Sunday. He said, Reverend Warnock said, "God helps those who help themselves" is not in the Bible. God helps those who cannot help themselves. And that's where we come in, right? You and I, that's where we come in. There is no finer definition of what it means to be a person of faith. Well, except for my mother's, maybe. I'm bringing her up one more time. Janie Schultz. When she said, being a Christian means helping others, not the other way around. We should never try to use God as a weapon or as an excuse to inflict suffering on others. Just yesterday, I found a bracelet that had belonged to my mother. I'd never seen it before, but it did not surprise me that she had it. It was one of those WWJD bracelets. Remember those? What would Jesus do? Well, I'm no expert on Jesus, but I'm pretty sure he'd say that doing nothing is no option. I also think Jesus would understand my frustration with the right-wing hate masquerading as Christianity, that is, and much of which has come my way for more than 2 decades as a columnist. I have a favorite bumper sticker, not on my car. Security tells us, don't let people know what you're driving. So it's in my office, over my desk. And it comes from the lyrics of a song sung by Linda K. Williams. When Jesus said, love your enemies, I think he probably meant don't kill them. That gives me great comfort. So I think I'm on solid ground if I'm getting frustrated. Joy is a strategy because it's the engine that keeps us going. We feel joy whenever we speak out against hate and injustice. We feel joy whenever we gather together to boost spirits in hard times. And I'm going to add this because for me, the future of this country is as much a spiritual issue as it is a political one. We feel joy whenever we do our part to inform voters and make sure they show up at the polls. Sometimes another word for joy is freedom. We don't know the outcome of this election, but we do know how it feels to have the right answer every morning to that question. When this is over, we want to be the people who showed up. Martin Luther King didn't know the outcome of the Montgomery bus boycott when he decided to lead that charge. Jonathan Igue has it came out last year, a new biography of Martin Luther King. Maybe some of you read it. I highly recommend it because he had access to thousands of pages of documents that no one had had access to before. So it's a deeper, more nuanced portrait of Martin Luther King. But this is the thing that having read a very fat book about him now, this is the scene I can't get out of my mind. You know, when they were all planning that bus boycott in 1955, they didn't have the internet. They didn't have TV stations or newspapers letting people know this was coming. Nobody was covering except for black papers, right? Black-owned newspapers, which were few there. So the only way they could get the word out, word of mouth, tell your neighbor, tell your friends, tell your families, through church, right? They were preaching about it every Sunday leading up to the event. Here's what we're going to do. This is how we're going to get the right to sit anywhere we want on that bus. We're going to boycott the buses. They used flyers. They used everything they could. And I always am in awe of what they were asking of everyone. People who depended on the bus to get to work, to get to church, to go shopping. They were asking to not do any of that. But they had no idea if it was going to work. And Jonathan Ike has this wonderful scene the morning of. Neither Martin Luther King nor his wife Coretta Scott King could sleep. So they got up very early. It's like 5 in the morning. And Martin Luther King is sitting at the kitchen table and he's drinking his coffee. And Coretta is standing in the front window. And she's watching. She's just standing. And all of a sudden she says, "Martin, come here." And Martin walks over and stands next to her, and they watch the first empty bus drive by. I say, I'm sure, I don't know why, I just get goosebumps every time I say that, because think of that moment for them. And then they waited a little longer, and a second empty bus drove by. And that's when Martin Luther King got in his car to go check out all those other empty buses. I feel like right now we are standing at the window. There's a lot at stake for our country right now, and we don't know how it's going to come out. But I'll tell you something, with you by my side, it's the only place I want to be. Thank you.
That these three congregations chose to work together on such an important project, and that our city leadership supports our efforts. Thanks to all of you who came out today as well. The work continues, and we are grateful to be in it with you all. One announcement, you are invited to meet our speaker inside the building at the reception in the community room, right behind us. Please join us inside for a time of refreshment and a chance to greet one another. And now we close in prayer. We give thanks for the fellowship, inspiration, and blessings that we have experienced in this gathering, and we ask that a spirit of truth and courage enlighten us all as we embrace the opportunities and challenges before us. May our hearts be moved so that we move the hearts of others. May the barriers which divide us dissolve and hatred and suspicion cease, so that all may know wholeness and abundance. May we stand in solidarity with all humanity, caring for each other and all creation. May we strive each day for justice, that the world may live in peace. And now the blessing of our Creator, the love of our Redeemer, and the power of the Spirit be with each of you this day and always. Go in peace. Amen.
That was powerful. That was powerful. I was there. To listen to Connie Schultz's speech again was even more powerful than the first time when we're hearing it for the first time. Does anybody want to make any comments? There were so many things that, she brought out, the dignity of work. Of course, she, quoted Dr. King many times. Our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Her story about her father, her mother, and just witnessing what happened with the waitress, and the lessons that she learned. The lessons that she learned were just memorable and important for us to hear. Anybody want to make a comment?
This is Irene Hooper.
Yes.
This hasn't been a good week for me. I didn't realize that the program was on, and Sam said it was, and I didn't want to miss it. Thank you so much. Hope is good work, and I've known and I have experienced some of the experiences that she has had with her family. But the most important part of it all is that they've said, whatever you want to do, you can do it. You can do it. And I have seen this happening in Shaker since we have been here. There have been good days and bad days, as there are good and bad days everywhere. But you just have to have the faith and know that you want things to not just be better for your family and yourself, but for others. And that takes real cooperation. And I just want to call out just a few names, like I see Mrs. Perkins over there, who has really been a soldier. And I just appreciate all the things that she has done. And Donna doesn't give up. Mm-hmm. And Connie Schultz I have had 2 occasions to be in her presence. She's met with my children, but I didn't know her before, but I know that she's a person who has a lot of hope, and you have to think of what you want to do and how many people you're going to help, because with a selfish attitude, you can't accomplish too much in this whole world. So I just want to say thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Mrs. Hooper. Thank you so much for your words and so much of the work that you have done. We all know that, you have made a difference in generations of families in the work that you've done. Your career as a teacher, your contributions to the Moreland community, even after you retired. And we see the fruits of people's labor because people show up. People show up, even when they don't necessarily know, if what they're doing is going to bear fruit, it does. It actually does. Anybody else have any comments? Yes. Carl, did I see? I don't have my. Yes. Oh, yes. Go right
There we
ahead.
go. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, yes, we can hear
Good.
you.
Well, I thought it was well worth hearing for a second time and might be well worth a third. But for those who might not know and would like to keep following Connie Schultz on her journey of hope, she writes these days, and it's on a platform that's called Substack. Now, I didn't know much about Substack. I'm fairly literate in the internet, but I didn't know about it until I heard about it. But if you put Connie Schultz Substack, hopefully yours, into a browser like Google or whatever, you'll find it. And every few weeks, she writes another essay, and it's free. So sometimes it kind of makes you tear up. Sometimes it makes you laugh. It almost always makes you think. So I would encourage people to keep following her journey of hope.
Yes. John just posted it in the chat. If anybody wants to jot that down. Thank you for sharing. That's wonderful. I'm sure that we could all use her wisdom. And, you know, I think even her story about the tips, my goodness, my goodness, and what a difference it made. What a difference it made. And a surprise, because we do assume that when we give, the people who are doing the hard work are the ones that are going to benefit from it. But that's not necessarily always the case. Anybody else want to make a comment? I'm glad that everybody's here. You know, it was just, and it will be, of course, Witness to History will be posted on the library site. So, you know, you'll be able to listen to Connie Schultz's, you know, speech. She brought out so much, you know, and so many words from Dr. King that we, you know, should be reminded of. And his last work, of course, was in Memphis, Tennessee, when he went there because of the sanitation workers' strike. And so the dignity of work he had represented over time. And also, you know, she brings up the, you know, the work about his anti-Vietnam speech that he gave in 1967. I think that was exactly a year before he was assassinated. And her words about her mother and her casseroles, and how many, you know, servicemen that Ohio contributes. It's just always important for us to, you know, keep in mind ordinary people, you know, offering, you know, sacrifices, you know, for the good of many, for the good of America, for the good of the world. Anybody else want to chime in? This was wonderful. This was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Perkins, for suggesting Porch Talk for a beloved community, and your service always. I always say, when I came to Moreland, I knew that people got things done because Joanne Perkins was the first person I knew that, you know, supporting our children in the schools and just commitment to the community. And I appreciate you sharing and suggesting that we have this Porch Talk event for Witness to History. It's wonderful for our collection. It absolutely is. Thank you so much. You know, one thing I want to share that everybody might not know is that the church at 17300, I think that's the address of Eastview now on Van Aken, has been designated a historic landmark. And I happen to be on landmark commission, so I, you know, was able to cast my vote. And so, you know, and commemorated, you know, very much because of Dr. King's speech there in July of 1965. So it's really, you know, a point of pride that people, you know, really made an effort for him to be there. And as you said, Carl, it was not necessarily met with open arms from everybody, But we see that even in the film, in the short film that we saw, people were picketing, but there were a lot of people who knew that that was the place to be, to be able to be in the presence of Dr. King. And he came to Cleveland a good number of times around then because, what was happening politically in Cleveland. But this was a very important historic moment, for Shaker Heights, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud that we were able to, commemorate his speech through this evening's Witness to History. So thank you all. So here I see your chat. I think I can get this, Monica. Oh, Quintella says, thank you so much for showing this. And let's see. We should do something for the 60th anniversary next year. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure that Heights Christian and Eastview and Plymouth are already have that in the works. I don't want to speak out of turn, but that is right. This is 59 years. Next year is the 60th. Thank you for that, Monica. What I do want to announce is that, did I get everybody's chat? Did I miss anything? Next month we'll be on October 13th, and stay tuned for who we will announce as our guest for October 13th. But if you want to mark your calendar at this particular time, and I am always looking for guests for Witness to History, and we will just keep on going, right, John? We'll keep on going until we just interview everybody in Shaker in Moreland. So here's my phone number. If you had suggestions, just like this program was suggested to me by Joanne Perkins. So if you have suggestions for programs, this is a, wonderful platform to bring important, programs and events to the community, and either email or just give me a buzz. Thank you all for being here this evening. Enjoy the rest of this beautiful Sunday evening and have a wonderful week. Thank you again. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much.